Good afternoon, everybody. We'd like to start the opening ceremony. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all to Università Cattolica. My name is Amanda Murphy. I'm the Professor of English Language and Linguistics here. And the team of people who are organizing come partly from my team and are from the Department of Modern Languages and Linguistics. The head of department is unfortunately not able to be here, but I'm vice head of department, so I'm able to welcome you also on behalf of the department itself. For us, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome such a friendly group of people, such a large group of people, for this prestigious conference, EuroCALL. Now, I'm just going to give you an idea of what the Cattolica is as a university, since I'm not sure how many of you know much about it. I'll just take a few minutes to do this. So, we are one university. Oops, something's happening here, which shouldn't be happening. Oh dear, sorry about that. I'm giving everything away. Be careful with the clicker, Luke. Okay, so we're one university in 5 campuses. All right, we're actually in 6 cities, but only 5 of them are important. And that's pretty unusual. As you can see here, we're spread around Italy. We're mostly in the north, but we also have a campus in Rome, where we have medicine. Now, it's one university spread out, which means that some of us teach in different cities. I teach in Milan and Brescia, for example, which is an hour away from here. I wanted to give you a picture of where you are, an aerial view, just because it's actually pretty simple. It's 2 big square cloisters, and we're in the middle, okay? And the conference is taking part in that cloister on the first floor. So, but if you keep going, you'll eventually get to the place you're looking for, all right? Because it's sort of, it's never ending, as it were. The interesting thing is that this is a building of 2 cloisters, and we have actually just acquired the police headquarters, which are outside the front gate. And so that's going to be our new campus. We're going to be doubling our size here. If you go out the front door, you'll see that there's a sliver which is clean, all right? It's not dirty yellow, and that is the bit which will start being used in September. So it's an exciting moment for the university, and we have just had our 100th anniversary. Now, obviously, these buildings are older than 100 years. This was originally a monastery, Benedictine monastery, from the 9th century, which was connected to the Basilica of Sant'Ambrogio. Sorry, I've got a problem with my voice, so I'm trying to project with the microphone. If you go out of the university, you see on the left this very beautiful church, all right? You must go in there and have a look. Sant'Ambrogio was one of the most important saints that put Milan on the map, 3rd century saint. If you go inside, you'll see beautiful mosaics. Those mosaics actually have been reconstructed because the basilica, like the university, was bombed during the war. But it's really worth visiting. Now, these cloisters were designed by Bramante, who was a famous Renaissance Italian architect. And they were designed in the 1500s. The fresco that you can see, it's a bit hidden by the screen, but it's a fresco from 1536 by Callisto Piazza, and the picture on it is the marriage of Cana. Now, all of this area of Milan is full of Roman ruins, okay? So whenever you start digging, we found a necropolis, a Roman necropolis, and all of the pedestrian area that you walk along as you go out of Cattolica, actually, that was where there was a Roman necropolis, and that place was under archaeological investigation for 10 years. I mean, it's beautiful now, but it was hell for 10 years. In this picture, you can see something that is in this university, which is a 9th century fridge, because the monks dug a fridge underground and they packed ice around it. So when we started building a different part of the university, this thing came to light. So there is a theatre now there, but it's also really basically a museum. Now, just a few facts about the university. I mean, this place was a monastery, but then it became a military hospital, all right? You probably know, if you know anything about the history of Italy, has, particularly northern Italy, has been under occupation many, many times, all right? So Napoleon was obviously in charge for a while, and during his time here, Milan had its first military hospital, and this was a hospital. And if I can just make Luke feel a little less intimidated, this room was actually 3 layers of floors with beds all the way up. So it hasn't always looked as beautiful and perhaps imposing as this. It was a hospital until the late 1920s. If you look above the entrance gate as you come in, you'll see it says 1929. So everything is very old, but the university is actually not that old. And we have a claim to fame here. Ernest Hemingway was a patient in this unit, in the hospital here in Cattolica. 2 words about who founded the Cattolica, because you may think Italy is a Catholic country. Aren't all universities Catholic? Well, no, they're not. All universities are state universities, non-confessional universities. So in the earlier 20th century, a Franciscan friar who was actually started out as an agnostic military man, he did his military service in these buildings when it was a hospital, and, shall we say, had a conversion. He became a Capuchin friar, Franciscan. He was actually a famous psychologist at the time and a famous phonetician, and he was the first rector of the university. But as we know, behind every great man, there's always a great woman, and the co-founder of the university is Blessed Armida Barelli, blessed because she had heroic virtues that have now been recognized by the church, and she's buried in the chapel at the front of the university. She was a very energetic woman who basically fundraised. She traveled the whole of Italy collecting money for this university, which is a private university, and obviously did a very good job because they managed to collect the money to found it. And she was an absolute pioneer in women's education. I mean, the Cattolica has always had women graduates from the day go, from day one. And that's not as common as you might think. In fact, Italy has got more female graduates than male graduates. I don't know if that's normal, but it's certainly not represented in the echelons of power. All right. However, after 100 years, we've got our first female rector. So in 2024, Professor Elena Beccalli, who'd been the Dean of Banking and Finance, became our first rector, and we're very happy about this development, obviously. Now, in Italy, you can have a maximum of 12 faculties, and that's what we've got, spread around Italy. We've got everything basically except technology and engineering. So you can graduate in economics, in law, in literature, in etc., sociology, psychology, all over the place. The university has about 36,000 students, all right, over 100 research centers. Between full and associate and contract lecturers, we're at about 5,600 academics. We have 50 English taught programs, which is actually very common in Italy now. More and more degree courses are being taught through English, which of course attracts an awful lot of international students. And as you can see, we have round about 4,500 international students who are either degree seeking or who come here for a semester from all over the world, basically. Enrolled in Cattolica, we have a very international student body, over 126 nationalities. And we are constantly increasing our outbound students. Okay, we're encouraging our students to go as far abroad as much as possible. I'm always encouraged to see that the second faculty is the languages faculty, which is where I work. I wish it was the first, but economics is the one that travels most. So, yeah, we have a lot of partners around the world. So this is the team that has been manning the desk together with our student helpers. All right, it's easy because they're either called Valentina or Francesca, and then there's Vincenzo, all right, who's obviously the main among us. I'm Amanda, I didn't put my name there, but I thought you might recognize me. So please feel free to ask us for anything that you need, and we hope you have a wonderful conference, so welcome everybody. Thank you. I'd like to invite Miriam. Would you like to come take the floor? Or Valentina first? Okay, sorry.
All right, thank you, Amanda. Just some information for you. So first of all, everyone, hi. Thank you very much for coming. It feels quite special to me because I remember sitting at one EuroCALL was one of my first international conferences, and now I have the privilege to hosting one. So this was a huge step, right? So thank you very much for coming. I think this really captures the spirit of this association of EuroCALL and the EuroCALL community. Some just a bit housekeeping information before we begin. First of all, the old conference presentation rooms are upstairs, so first floor, and the other 3 plenaries and also the AGM will also take place upstairs in room 110. All information and updates will be posted on Huva, so please download the app. You've got the QR and the invitation code on your badge, so please keep an eye on it. If you need to refill your bottles, we've got a water fountain, and it's downstairs at the Polo Studenti. If it's not easy for you to find it, you find a map on Uva, and we've pinned the place there, so it will be easy for you to get that. Finally, there's a welcome reception tonight at 7 p.m. Since it is not raining, it will take place right here in the garden next to this Aula Magna, right? Hope to see you there. And now I give the floor to our president, Miriam.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Miriam Haug. I'm currently the president of EuroCALL. My academic home is the Open University in the UK, where I am a professor for critical digital pedagogies. Thank you, Amanda, Valentina, and the local team for hosting us. 290 delegates from 39 different countries. Yes, yes. As always, it has been quite a journey that you, the local team, and we, the members of the executive committee, have been on before arriving at this very point. We are very honored, we are very humbled, and we are very grateful, and are looking forward to the next 3 days, where we will be looking for and sharing new research agendas in CALL. I would like to express my special thanks to all of you who have made an effort to align your contributions with the theme of this year's conference, CALL, New Research Agendas. And I would like to extend a particularly warm welcome to those who join us, the EuroCALL family, as we see ourselves, for the very first time. Could I ask all of those who are here for the first time at a EuroCALL conference to stand up so that we can give you a round of applause? Let me now introduce very briefly my colleagues from the EuroCALL Executive Committee. First and foremost, there is Tony Patton, the EuroCALL coordinator, who keeps us on the straight and narrow in all we do for this association. Kate Borthwick, the Vice President and Program Co-Chair of all our conferences, who has a particular responsibility for the reviewing process of the conference submissions. Ana Jimeno, former EuroCALL President and Editor-in-Chief of the EuroCALL Review. Valentina Morgana, usually responsible for our special interest groups, but this year she's been organizing a conference somewhere, I think. And she has therefore had the full support of Jamie Selwood, who comes to us like quite a few of you all the way from Japan. Cédric Sarré, who is the official go-to person for all future EuroCALL conference organizers. But Cédric is also our webmaster, and he is behind our new and flash EuroCALL website. Kevin O'Donnell, who is responsible for our national representatives. Alex Bolton, who is the co-editor-in-chief of ReCALL, that is the journal that is associated with EuroCALL. Yazdan Shubhas, who is the editor of our short papers. And then there are two members who can't be with us. They're with us in spirit, for sure. There's Teresa McKinnon, who is our honorary secretary and our social media officer. And last but not least, there is David Barr, our treasurer. You may be seated. Please, both new and old, or rather seasoned, attendees of our annual conferences, do not hesitate to approach us to share your thoughts, your suggestions, and hopefully your positive feedback during the conference and afterwards. Now I have a few important announcements to make. Again, like Valentina has just pointed out, for those who have not yet registered on the Hoover app, please do so ASAP, because all announcements, all changes to the programs and other important things will come to you via the Hoover app. Also, there will be, and you've probably already realized that, there will be photographs taken throughout the conference. If you do not wish to be on a photo, that's perfectly okay, but please come to one of us and let us know sooner rather than later. I would like to ask all special interest group secretaries and chairs who are here at the conference to make yourself known to Jamie. Could you stand up one more time, please? All special interest group chairs and secretaries, please contact Jamie as soon as possible. I would like to do all national reps that are present here at the conference to do the same, but don't go to Jamie, go to Kevin. Yeah. Everybody, please come to our AGM, our annual general meeting. You are members, you have a say in how we run this association. Please come and join us on Friday at 5:30 p.m. Also, please do engage with the survey that Kate has just started on Hoover, which is about why EuroCALL is important to you, because we would like to gather some information on the impact of our association. And as this is a multilingual conference, con questo dichiaro aperto il convegno EuroCALL 2025.
Right, thank you very much, everybody. It's my pleasure today to welcome our first plenary speaker. It's nice to have an introduction because it makes me feel important. This is Luke Plonsky, all the way from Flagstaff, Arizona. He's Professor of Applied Linguistics in the Department of English at Northern Arizona University, along with such luminaries as Douglas Biber, Randy Reppen, Jesse Egbert, the team which recently welcomed a doctoral student of mine, Warren Bonar, so thank you very much from his point of view. He came back full of enthusiasm. Luke is also Honorary Professor at the International Education Institute at the University of St Andrews. He's Editor of Studies in Second Language Acquisition, Managing Editor of Foreign Language Annals, General Editor of Applied Linguistics Press. He's very active in this kind of editorial publication procedure, very interested in the research process, not just one little area. He was also co-founder of IRIS, the database, so if you have supplementary materials in applied linguistics, great place to put them online. You think you publish a lot? Luke publishes a lot. Click on his website, have a look. Estimated over 100 papers and publications of different types. I looked in Google Scholar. He's been cited 24,791 times. He has an H index of 58, which means that of his publications, 58 of them have been cited at least 58 times. Is that feedback? And he finds time to do sport. He's walked over 100 miles in Europe just on one particular go, in 5 hours, 6 hours, 500 miles, a bit more maybe. He lists his interests as second language acquisition and instructed second language acquisition, more specifically computer-assisted and app-based language learning, as well as individual differences, vocabulary development, task-based language teaching, interaction, pragmatics, pronunciation, and assessment. He's worked with Duolingo, all of these things, so many interests. But to me, when I think of Luke, what I think of first and foremost is research methodology. One of the first people to almost invent a career in applied linguistics in research methodology. So quantitative in particular, but also qualitative and mixed method studies, best practices, very interested in best practices, but also QRPs, questionable research practices, things that we could be doing better. Syntheses and meta-analyses, he's done several for CALL, and in fact, if you go onto his homepage, type Luke Plonsky homepage, you'll find a list of all the bibliometric analyses and meta-analyses and syntheses that he has come across in the fields of applied linguistics as a whole. So today, the title of the talk is The Role of Meta-Science in CALL, From Effectiveness to Ethics. So please welcome Luke Plonsky.
Okay, well, thanks. I was going to stop you there in a second, Alex, but I'm glad you wrapped up when you did, because I was starting to get a little embarrassing. Okay, thank you so much for everybody being here. It is a real honor for me to get to be here with you all at this conference in this room. If I get a little bit preachy, you know, sometimes I do. Maybe you know why. You'll excuse me, right? Because it feels a little bit like we're in church this afternoon, which I love. Okay, so also really, I want to say very specifically thank you to Miriam and Amanda and Alex, all the Valentinas, all the Francescas, the one Vincenzo that I know of. So thank you so much, you guys, for putting this on. We know it's so much work to put on a conference, and I really, really appreciate it. This is going to be a little heavy on the. We're going to get pretty meta here, okay? And so as I was thinking about slides, I was like, what sort of image represents kind of the meta nature of this discussion? It's sort of like meta, and how many levels deep do you go into the meta? And so I thought, well, let me make the slide itself the background for the slide. And I thought, that's not quite meta enough. Let me make the slide with the slide as the background into the background of the slide. Okay, so now we're like 3 levels deep. Meta research is here. Meta research is here in a major way in the language sciences and in applied linguistics. This chart simply represents the frequency of meta research and applied linguistics over the last 25, 27 years. An explosive growth. As Alex mentioned, I keep a bibliography on my website, and that's where these numbers come from. We've seen not only tons and tons of publications and presentations, we've seen special issues in journals, and in fact, one new journal just launched, Research Synthesis in Applied Linguistics, dedicated exclusively to synthetic research and synthetic methods. We've seen lots of different workshops and books come out. There's a SIG group specifically for research synthesis. And workshops, there are semester-long courses. I teach a semester-long class on meta research as well. And a lot of this comes from CALL, as I'm sure many of you are well aware. The table on the left is a synthetic review of previous syntheses, right? And these are the journals that most often publish synthetic research. And the ones I've highlighted there are all technology-oriented journals. So some of the journals that most often publish synthetic research are technology journals. Same thing on the right. These are the journals that publish the most synthetic research. The highlighted ones are the technology-based journals. This is a keyword analysis from this synthesis of several hundred synthetic studies, right? And the largest circle representing the most frequent keyword is technology-mediated language learning. So we see a lot of synthetic research, a lot of meta research coming from the world of CALL and technology. Now I want to note, meta-analysis, and I've done a lot of work on meta-analytic methods, and I've been part of a number of meta-analyses, like Alex as well, and others here. This is certainly part of meta-science, and that's probably the most well-known aspect of meta-science, is formal or proper meta-analysis. Where in meta-analysis, just for anybody who isn't familiar, meta-analysis is where we take lots and lots of data across lots and lots of studies. We put the results of those studies into a common index or metric, often called an effect size, right? And we distill those results into a common effect size index, right, such as a d-value, and then we aggregate those into some number or set of numbers that represents the overall relationship or effect of interest and some measure of the variance around that estimate. Okay, that's meta-analysis in a nutshell. Easy. We can see here, this is sort of what that might look like visually, where we put a bunch of results. Each of these bars represents the effect size from a particular primary study, which can then be meta-analyzed or averaged into the overall d-value here of 0.94. This is an example of correlation coefficients, where we simply average all the correlations together, and that's what we do when we do meta-analysis. Okay? That's part of meta-science and meta-research, but it's so much broader than that. Meta-research and meta-science addresses a number of different issues that are concerned with, as the name implies, the ways that we do research. Meta-research involves research on, of course, research methods, such as how we do research, study design, methods, statistics, collaboration, research reporting, the way that we communicate research, what gets presented in the published studies or in other ways that we present our research, reproducibility, replicability, verifying of research, evaluation, assessing study quality, things like peer review as well. And then the incentive structures that exist in our sort of professional sphere, the ways that we reward research, the ways that our institutions prioritize grant funding or prioritize certain activities like publications and grants, for better or for worse. there's research on the way that these mechanisms influence our behavior. This is meta-research and meta-science, okay? And there's been a lot of research, so what's most well known in applied linguistics is certainly proper meta-analysis. But all of these are studies that have been carried out within applied linguistics on different meta-science type topics. Statistical knowledge and training in second language acquisition. Missing data management practices, the good, the bad, and the ugly. 7 sins of L2 research. Okay, why some articles are highly cited in linguistics, bibliometric studies. Self-citation practices, okay, things like that. This is all part of meta-science. And outside the language sciences, outside of our world of CALL and applied linguistics, of course, there are entire associations and bodies and conferences and journals devoted to meta-science, right? This summer, the meta-science conference happened at UCL in London. The journal Scientometrics exists. There's the Metrics Center at Stanford devoted exclusively to meta-science. Lots of really interesting stuff going on there. Of course, the Center for Open Science, which is really well known as a repository where we post materials and protocols and things like that. Okay. But for me, yes, meta-analysis is part of meta-research, and there's much broader than that. But for me, the core and the heart of meta-science and meta-research is quality. It's about the quality of the research that we produce. Okay? Now, a few early considerations before we jump into the quality issue, and that's going to be the bulk of this discussion. Okay? And these are just for your consideration. To hopefully give you something to think about. I want us to just consider for a minute what it says about us as a field that until recently, we've not had a really strong tradition of expertise in research methodology or meta-science. You know, when Alex mentioned that I've sort of made this career of being a methodologist, when I was doing my PhD, my advisors, Sue Gass and Sean Lowen, if anybody knows them, they were like, okay, you want to do this methods thing? Okay, yeah, okay, methods, that's cool, but like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was like, I want to be a methodologist. And they were like, Luke, that's not a career. In applied linguistics, we don't have research methodologists. It doesn't exist. And I'm like, well, can I try? I mean, I don't know, like, this is what I want to do, hold my beer or something, right? Whatever the expression is. I was like, I want to try it, and that's what I've been trying to do. Okay, but what does it say? Other fields, you can get a degree in educational research methodology. You can get a degree in psych methods, for example. We haven't had this tradition in our fields. What does it say about us? I think that's changing. That's a good thing. Second point, the mechanisms meant to ensure quality, there are structural mechanisms built into our discipline and all of academia that are meant to ensure or improve research quality, but we don't understand these mechanisms very well. They're often insufficient, and in some cases, they might actually be harming the field. What we have research, we have training, we have graduate programs, we have some guidelines, kind of APA-ish. We have certain journals that have guidelines. We have peer review. These are the sort of built-in mechanisms and structures, and then we have incentives. Okay, hopefully there are incentives and also disincentives for bad research. But we don't understand these things well enough, I would say. And so this is where meta-science comes in to help us understand these mechanisms, because they're very high stakes and they're very powerful in influencing the ways that we do research and the ways that our careers advance or not. So with all this in mind, I think that study quality needs to be assessed rather than assumed. Okay? And then third, if we're not assessing quality and we're not insisting on quality, I really have to ask, and I don't mean to sound cynical about this, but what is the point? Why are we, is this just for fun? Do we just do research because it's fun? Hopefully not. It is fun, okay, in like a kind of nerdy way, right? But I feel like I'm in good company with that. But if we don't insist on high quality research, why are we doing any of this? Is it just a job? I think for most of us, this is more than a job. I think we love this. I get that sense walking around and talking to people here at every conference I go to, like people are excited about the research, okay? But it should be more than just the fun and excitement. It should be because we care about producing real knowledge and have it a real impact in the real world, and we'll get to that soon. Okay, so I've been talking about quality already. Well, what is it? What is quality? A few different ways that we can approach this question. I want to ask you all how you would define quality in CALL research. Okay? What features do you think, just think for a second, that you feel like make up high quality CALL research? How would you define it? And then is your definition, because I said it has to be, we should be measuring it, is your definition operationalizable? Well, lots of really smart people have thought about this before. I didn't invent this idea, right? There's people, you know, so the Merton here put together 50, 70 years ago the Mertonian norms or ethos of science. He's from the field of sociology or sociology of science. This is sort of like philosophy of science, sociology of science. And he put together 4 principles that he described as being part of the norms of the ethos or what makes up quality science. Communality, right? Meaning that it's accessible, belonging to all. Universalism, that it's objective, replicable, that everybody can contribute. Disinterestedness, that kind of idea of objectivity or unbiasedness, that we're not doing research in ways that are exclusively built to advance our careers or for profit. And then a sense of organized skepticism, that we make evidence-based claims. In other words, that we have few threats to validity of our research is another way we might put that. What do you think of this? Think this works? Is this measurable? Is this operationalizable? I like it as a starting point, but to me it's a little bit abstract, I have to say. It sounds like something a philosopher of science would come up with. Maybe not an empirical researcher himself. Maybe he was, I don't know. No offense, Merton. But also a little bit hard to operationalize and maybe a little too positivist. Shadish, Cook, and Campbell, really classically in their treatment of causal inference, put together a 4-part model of, many of us are familiar with these terms, construct validity. They would define quality as something like minimizing threats to construct validity, to internal validity, to external validity, and statistical validity. I think there's value there as well. There's something we could draw from that. But I feel like this is also a little too positivist, a little too quanty. I'm quanty, by the way. I lean quant. But this is a little too quanty, I think, to apply to a field as broad as ours. It's only methods. I think it's a little too narrow. And also it's mainly concerned with causation. And not all of us are interested in causal relationships. I've taken a couple cracks at this before myself. I tried to do this in 2013 and then a follow-up study with those same advisors who told me I couldn't be a methodologist. I'm just, don't tell them that, okay? Yeah, I don't want to say, I'm not like trying to air dirty laundry here. But we had earlier defined it as possibly adherence to standards of contextually appropriate methodological rigor and transparent and complete reporting of such practices. It's okay. Right? It's not too bad. It's not too bad. But for me still, that was just methods. And I feel like the quality of our research has to go beyond just methods. Okay? So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to propose a framework. And I welcome any feedback or comments. This is not set in stone. But that this is a framework that I propose that we can move forward to consider quality in the context of applied linguistics research. Okay? There are 4 parts to this framework. The first is transparency. Second, methodological rigor or quality. That's a margarita. And just when I was thinking about quality, that just came to mind. Don't take from that what you will. Okay. Ethics. I feel like our research has to be ethical for us to consider it to be of high quality. And then last, I think it has to be of some societal value. I think that has to be part of our definition, and our measure of quality has to be that it contributes to society. And, those are my kids, and they're just sort of here to represent society, because like they don't care about research at all. So like if I ask myself, might this research somehow eventually benefit them in their world, then I think it has more quality. Okay? And by society, I mean both non-academic society and academic society. Producing scientific knowledge for the sake of scientific knowledge can also be valuable. That's part of society. That's part of societal contribution. All of these are actually, as you might already have thought, all of these different dimensions of quality are related to each other. And in some ways, they're actually sometimes hierarchical. So for example, transparency is a prerequisite for methodological rigor, because we can't assess rigor without transparency. Likewise, if a study is not of high methodological rigor, then it cannot contribute to society, right? Because if the validity is questionable, then it won't be able to contribute to society as well. So these are actually all interrelated, and we'll get into some examples of that here pretty soon. Similarly, we need transparency in order to assess the ethics of the research as well. Okay, so lots of connections across these different dimensions. Alex also mentioned, and this is part of the ethical dimension, questionable research practices, which I think is a lot more interesting way to think about ethics. You know, a lot of us sort of brush away ethics very immediately because we think, oh, ethics is plagiarism and fabrication and falsification, and I don't do that, right? Well, of course not, but ethics is so much more interesting than that. To me, There's ethical decisions and a dimension to almost all of the decisions that we make throughout the conduct of a study. So if you think about it through the lens of what we would call questionable research practices. Questionable research practices are all those decisions that we make that are in that gray area of, I don't know, is this okay? Should I do this? Is this the right way to do it? Is this the best way to do it? Things like selective reporting of results. Things like omitting certain methodological details. Might that be questionable? Yeah, sometimes that's questionable. Self-plagiarism, handling of outliers, self-citation. Are these things bad? No, not inherently bad, but are there some cases when we should question them? Yeah, there probably are. That's what QRPs, or questionable research practices, is all about. This will come up some more. Some colleagues and I, led by Tuve Larsen, my colleague at Northern Arizona University, we recently sort of dove into this topic sort of head on and developed a taxonomy of QRPs for applied linguistics. And that's linked there if you want to check it out. It's on the website as well. And I'll refer to some of these QRPs throughout the discussion today, because this is sort of this broader understanding of ethics as part of study quality. Just to give you a couple of examples, I don't expect you to read that. This is just a few examples from the taxonomy of QRPs that we put together. And we had 4 different categories of QRPs. Funding was the first one. So for example, one QRP, or questionable research practice from the process of funding, would be cherry picking samples or data or results that favor the funder. So if you want to get funding from a particular organization and you present the lit review in a way that makes it seem like you're likely to find results that align with their priorities, that's questionable. From the section on design and data collection, employing instruments or measures without a strong validity argument. How many of us have done that? Probably all of us. Data analysis, removing certain items or cases in order to obtain a more favorable result. At least questionable, but also very common. And from the category of dissemination, not reporting certain results because they're not statistically significant. To me, that's ethically questionable. So just the point here is that these ethical decisions are sort of embedded into so much of what we do. Even these things that we might think of as methodological decisions are actually ethical decisions. Okay. So how are we doing on quality? Now that we've sort of laid out a definition for quality, it's not looking very good. It's not looking very good, and part of the problem is that these methodological concerns, and in some cases ethical concerns, they're sort of like carbon monoxide sort of seeping their way into so much of the research in the field. And I'm sorry, I warned you I might get a little bit preachy if I start pounding the pulpit here, okay, but I have serious concerns. I want to talk about 3 issues in particular related to, as they pertain to quality in the context of call research, okay? And by the way, I'm not the only one here talking about this. You have lots of different, I saw Alex earlier, Burston and Bolton and Cobb and Bolton and Vatkina and lots of other people who are here and who are not here who have been contributing to this discussion. This is not something I'm making up. Lots of people have been assessing and considering issues of quality in the context of call. What I'm sort of trying to contribute to the discussion is this framework of study quality, and especially the part about QRPs. Okay, so the first one the 3 I'm going to talk about are sampling, instrumentation, and reporting of results. I wanted to talk about topics and issues that I think are relevant to pretty much everybody here who does research. If you do research in call, you're probably involved in some sampling, some instrumentation, and some reporting. Okay, so I'm going to talk about those 3 things. First, quality and sampling. I just want to keep these images here to sort of keep in mind what are the 4 dimensions of quality that we're talking about. And sampling has to do with all of them. There are aspects of sampling that have to do with transparency, with the societal contribution of our research, with ethics, and with methodological rigor. Okay, so there's actually 3 major issues. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but just introduce them as I see it, that are specifically of concern. First is sample size. This is an issue, and I know we're all familiar with this from, for anybody who's taken a stats class or uses stats. Sample size matters for a lot of reasons, but it matters especially for things like statistical power, precision, stability of results, and what you might call the signal-to-noise ratio, our ability to actually detect or understand the relationships that we care about. We need large samples, not because I would not say because they give us statistical significance. We need large samples because what they give us are stable, dependable results. as opposed to small samples, which are bouncy. Small sample estimates and results means, or any statistic, is going to bounce around a lot when it's based on a small sample. This is an issue for internal validity, right? Do we actually know what we think we know about the effect or the relationship of interest? Okay? A second major issue, which is complementary to size, is actually diversity. It's not the how many participants we sample, it's the who we sample, right? This has to do more with generalizability or external validity, okay? This has to do with looking at samples that are different from each other, for example, okay? And the third issue, and this is very specific to CALL, is longitudinal, is attrition in longitudinal designs of CALL effectiveness. I've been involved in a number of studies that are longitudinal in design, looking at mobile-assisted language learning effectiveness, and we lose lots and lots of participants over time. This is really common in longitudinal designs. But the reason that this is a problem, one of the main reasons this is a problem, is because as you lose participants, the people that you lose may not be representative of the target population, right? So therefore, it's almost like a self-selection bias, or people self-select out of the study, then you have a threat to internal validity. This is a major problem, and I'd love to see more research on attrition in longitudinal designs. Right now, I'm going to talk just about diversity. Okay? I'm not in the United States, so I can talk about diversity right now, right? If I was in the US, you can't say that word. Yeah. Maybe some of you know. Okay. Lourdes Ortega said 16 years ago, most of what we know about language learning pertains mostly to formal learning by highly literate adults, or adolescents and adults in schools and universities. This is a concern. Our friend Robert Kaiser said, similarly and more bluntly, almost every sample has been one of convenience. This is also a concern. Here in the context of CALL research, Macaro et al. Said, in the vast majority of studies, they looked at a sample of CALL research. This is synthesis. Generalizability does not appear to be of importance. Although populations are generally referred to, or at least implied, it is not clear what marks them out as special or different from other populations. Sampling frames are almost never provided. Consequently, it is unclear how the sample relates to the population. È vero o falso? Well, we have data on this. We have data on this. So looking at Xiao and Peng, 2025, looking at a sample of studies, of CALL studies, they found overwhelmingly that the samples that are used in our research are non-probabilistic, right, meaning not randomly sampled, and almost always convenient sampled. They're convenient samples, okay? Which has important implications and limitations both for internal and external validity of our studies. This is a concern. What about the different language groups that we sample in terms of L1s, L2s, or people use the term LN or target language for different languages of interest? Magali Pacot and I looked at this a number of years ago just in the context of learner corpus research. And you can see each of these are different time periods from the 90s, first few years of the 2000s, and then about the second decade of the 2000s. And the gray bars represent the studies in our sample. They were looking at English as a target language. The yellow bar was everything else as a target language. You can see we're pretty much just doing research on English in the realm of learner corpus research. What about in CALL? What's it going to look like? So this is a question we could ask. So the question I asked here was, to what extent does CALL research examine different L1s and different target languages? Okay? And the approach here is a sort of meta-sample as corpus, and Alex and Nina have talked about this and used this technique a little bit. Where's Nina? Oh, there she is. Okay. And Atsushi Mitsumoto and other people have sort of talked about using a sample, like a synthetic sample or sample of primary studies, as a corpus. So that's what I'm doing here a little bit. And so what I did was I took a corpus that I maintain. This is a corpus of second language research. It's got 28 journals in it, about 25,000 articles, and about 150 million words. I don't know if you can see those abbreviated titles, but you have an idea, you could have an idea of what the journals are. 25 sort of top-tier journals in applied linguistics. And I took from that a subcorpus consisting of just 3 journals, 3 CALL-oriented journals with about 2,000 articles and 16 million words. The journal CALL, Language Learning and Technology, and Recall. I don't have Calico yet in my sample. If anybody wants to collect the corpus of Calico and give it to me, I would much appreciate that. I'll let it next time. So I searched the corpus using ANCONC for occurrences of 24 different languages. They're not all the languages, of course, but 24 commonly studied L1s and L2s. And I calculated the raw frequency as well as the number of unique texts with each language, sort of as a proxy for employing participants in our studies of different L1 and L2 backgrounds. Okay, and I also reran the analysis for our conference program. Okay, this is what we see from the corpus, and it's disappointing, but I wouldn't say it's surprising. What we see is overwhelmingly an interest in English. This is the percentage of papers in the corpus or in the sample that referred to each of these different languages. And if you can't see it at the bottom, it's English. And then going up from there, just the next few are French, Spanish, Chinese, German, Japanese, Korean, Italian, Turkish, etc. Okay? So basically, are we studying language learners and language learning? Not really. We're studying language learners and language learning in North America, Western Europe, and East Asia. That's pretty much what we're studying. And if we're cool with that, then cool, right? Okay, but let's just be clear that that is what we know about. We don't know about language learning and like the population of learners on planet Earth. What we know about is language learning and language learners in like a few countries. Okay, I told you I was going to get preachy. Okay, this is our program. This is our program. So this is hard. This is tough. This is tough. But putting the mirror on ourselves a little bit, this is the frequency of each of these languages in this conference program. Okay, so the raw number of titles and abstracts in EuroCALL 2025 that mention different languages. Gulp. It hurts a little bit. It hurts a little bit. And I think it should. I think we need to feel that. I think we have to talk about this. Okay. What about so overall, we have a lack of research on non-weird populations, the non-Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic populations. We have a lack of research on non-educational settings. P, are you there? Okay, I think we have people doing research on non-educational settings too, and that's great. But overall, we have mostly a lack of research on non-educational settings. Languages other than English, we have a lack of. We have a lack of research on advanced L2 users. Where's Jack? His paper this afternoon is going to talk about that. And then we have a lack of research on older learners. And I want to call out, this is a major opportunity for MAL research. If anybody is doing any of that, I know there's a MAL SIG a little bit later that maybe is already talking about this and interested in this. But when I do research with Duolingo, our mean age is like 68 or something. Like our samples are super not young. Yeah. So I'm like, is that really the mean age? I'm like, wow, okay, yeah, cool, great. Older folks love Duolingo. So that's an opportunity for us. Okay? But so what? So we have a lack of all these research on these populations. So what? Well, a couple of implications. Small samples in quantitative research greatly limit and even distort the inferences that we make because we fail to observe relationships, or when we observe them, they're actually probably overestimates of the true population estimate. Okay? This is not a neutral choice. A lot of people are like, no, this is just, I just happen to be interested in university learners of English at the university in my town, right? That's just what I care about. Well, is that really what you care about? Well, I'm not here to point fingers, but this is not a neutral choice. Our sampling decisions greatly limit our ability to contribute to theory as well as to practice beyond narrow and likely already very privileged settings. And by doing so, I think we're not adequately serving the scientific or the practitioner communities that we care about. We care about communities outside of already wealthy populations. We should study them so we can better serve them. Okay, second major issue, quality and instrumentation. Okay, so sampling, instrumentation, and then reporting. Instrumentation, I feel like also has relevance and applicability to transparency, to our ability to contribute to society, to ethical issues and methodological rigor, especially these two, ethics and rigor. Okay, so first of all, we need to recognize that most of what we care about and that we measure, most of the variables are latent, meaning not directly observable, and actually quantitative. And remember, I'm a quanti guy. I totally lean quant. I do almost exclusively quantitative research. But all the things that we care about, think about a variable in a study that you're carrying out now or that you read recently. The variable in its nature was qualitative. We might have used quantitative techniques to understand that variable or not, but the thing is qualitative. We have to remember that. So when we measure these things, we have to demonstrate, we have to provide validity evidence for that variable or that measure. We accounted for this in our list of QRPs. We said a QRP, we labeled as a QRP, choosing a research or instrument type that provides comparatively easy or convenient access to data instead of one that has a strong validity argument behind it. Now we all do this. I've done this for sure myself many, many times. When I showed you that data a few minutes ago, just looking at L1 and L2 backgrounds, was that the highest validity way of measuring L1 and L2 backgrounds in our research? No, that was convenient. That was easy. Okay, that's what I did. Is that questionable? Yeah, but I think it served as a convenient proxy for this talk. Okay, proxy for the actual variable of interest, which is what are the L1 and L2 backgrounds of the participants in our studies. Okay, so getting back to the instrumentation, more quotes here. Norris and Ortega. Problematic is the tendency to assume rather than build an empirical case for the validity of whatever assessment method is being adopted. Carol Chappell. Validity should be of central importance to the credibility of results. Rod Ellis. While researchers have always recognized this issue, validity in SLA measurement, they have largely ignored it. Norbert Schmidt. Most vocabulary tests are not validated to any great degree. Cohen and Macaro. There's perhaps an unwritten agreement that readers will accept measures used in an SLA study at face value. Jack Burston et al. This body of research demonstrates again and again the lack of instrument reliability and validity. This is the concern. Is this true for CALL? Right? Are we really like the Wizard of Oz, just sort of like, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, just look at, my results are valid, trust me. Is that really the way it is? Do we actually not care about validity? I think of course we care about validity, but we need to study it. Assessing validity and producing a validity argument, that is an empirical endeavor in its own right. I think we've largely overlooked that. Do we see validity evidence though? Do we have validity evidence in our studies? You know where this is going? How can we assess this? There are at least three different ways we could assess the presence of validity evidence in our research. The first would be a synthetic approach. This is classic meta-research, hand coding of primary studies, diving into the primary literature and coding for the presence or absence of validity evidence. We can do that. Let's do it. And there's been a few people who have done that, all right? Burston et al. They found pervasive failure to report reliability and validity. How and Arya doused. Also, very little evidence of reliability, in this case, internal consistency, content validity, and construct validity. Remember, validity is a multifaceted construct as well. There are lots of different parts and pieces to a validity argument. It's not just like we have validity or we don't have validity. There are lots of different types of validity. And then Xiao and Peng, looking at 330 studies, mall studies, that they found only 10 to 12% of the studies in their sample, the instruments were reviewed, tested, and or piloted. So kind of a lack of validity evidence. And I'm not saying that the instruments that they used were not valid, but there wasn't evidence of the validity of the instruments. Okay, that's one way we could assess this. And the evidence here would point to the fact that we don't have a lot of validity evidence of our instruments. Okay? That puts into serious question what we think we know about the effects of CALL. The downside to this approach, this manual hand coding approach, is that it's very time consuming. Trust me, I've done a lot of this type of research. And it's also subject to high inference judgments on the part of the coders. Like, so when you're reading an article, are you able to assess, how well can you assess whether or not the validity argument is there for a particular instrument? There's a lot of judgment involved there, which leads to errors on the part of coders like me. Okay, a second way we could assess the presence of validity evidence in instruments or in a field like ours is to just ask people. Say, hey, do you use valid instruments? Do you have validity arguments? And we kind of did that. So after we put together that taxonomy of questionable research practices, we produced a survey of questionable research practices, and we asked several hundred people in the field about the frequency, pervasiveness, and the severity of these different QRPs. And one of them, as I mentioned before, was choosing a design or instrument type that provides easy or convenient access to data instead of one with a strong validity argument behind it. Each of those bars represents the frequency that was reported for each of the QRPs in our survey. This was the second most frequent one. okay? And I realized it looks like a yay banner, like, yay, this was number 2. No, that's not a good thing. It's not like I'm excited about it. This is the second most frequent QRP in our study that people reported not having using instruments that are convenient rather than ones that have strong validity arguments behind them. Okay, it's another serious concern that puts into question the validity of our instruments. That's where we get our data. Okay, a third approach would be, again, that meta-sample as corpus approach. Okay, so again, similarly to what I did with the sampling, was I took that corpus and I created the subcorpus for the tech journals, CALL, Language Learning and Technology, and ReCALL. And then I looked at, in this case, I searched the corpus for occurrences of all of these different facets of validity. So predictive, discriminant, divergent, construct, face, etc. Okay, and then I calculated the raw frequency of each of those terms in the corpus, as well as the number of unique texts in the corpus that had referred to these different facets of validity. Okay, how do you think it turned out? Here's what we get. Each of these bars represents the percentage of articles in the corpus of about 2,000 articles that referred to each of these different facets of validity. Okay, so 0.05% of the corpus referred to divergent validity. Divergent validity is how we distinguish between two constructs that we measure. Right? That means that a measure distinguishes between the two constructs. So approximately 1 in every 1,000 articles referred to divergent validity. It's not much. We did see, though, the most frequent was construct validity. And that's probably not a surprise if anybody deals in measurement and psychometrics and that kind of stuff, instrumentation, assessment. We talk about construct validity more often. There were 50 studies in the sample that referred to construct validity, but that's only 1 in 40. So you had to read 40 whole papers to get to one paper that would even mention construct validity. Does that mean they provided an argument or evidence in favor of the construct validity? No. And you could also argue that people might have presented construct validity evidence without mentioning the word construct validity. That's also totally possible. Okay? So is this an exact or pure measure of evidence of construct validity? No, it's not. This is a proxy. This is a proxy, but I'm trying to make the argument or the point that we don't talk about validity enough. So to me, that's an indicator of a lack of validity in our field. Okay. The third major issue I want to talk about is reporting, and in particular, selective reporting. All right. So Dan Isbell and a group of us, we put out a study a few years ago, and this was the first study of QRPs in applied linguistics. And this is sort of the precursor to the Larson et al. Taxonomy of QRPs that we put together more recently. And we gave a survey of 10 QRPs to a sample of about 350 applied linguists. We asked them about a bunch of different questionable research practices. We sort of put together this list at the time, and since we've developed it further. But each of these orange bar, I'll mention the percentages inside of the bars. Each of these are different QRPs, and I'll read some of these because I don't expect you can read them. But each of these percentages represents the percentage of participants in our sample that had engaged at some point in these practices. The first couple are not reporting. 14% of our sample reported not reporting or admitted to not reporting a finding that was contrary to the literature. So just because their results were different from what was in previous literature, they didn't report it. Okay, they suppressed those results. 11% of the sample excluded findings that were just because they were contrary to their own or to their colleagues' previous research. Okay, moving down, the next one, 43% of the sample omitted results simply because they were not statistically significant. 48% of the sample didn't even attempt to publish a study because the results were not statistically significant. And then 45% of the sample reported effect sizes only when they had statistically significant results. Okay? To me, what we're doing here is sort of at the field-wide level, at the individual level, but consequently we go to the meta level. What we're doing is we are suppressing our own results, right? We are systematically ourselves biasing the literature by not reporting. These are what we might call sins of omission. It feels like a chaplain here, so I can talk about sins, right? So it's sort of like a sin of omission. By leaving these things out, we're actually, I think, harming the field in perhaps serious ways. This comes out a lot of times in the context of meta-analysis, and many of you will be familiar with this. When we look at a sample of effect sizes in a meta-analytic sample, we create what's called a funnel plot, which is this, and I'm sure most of you have seen this before. It's supposed to be shaped like an inverted funnel, and we expect to see the higher part, it's the effect sizes across the x-axis and some measure of variability or error on the y or the vertical axis. And what we expect to see is a clustering of effects towards the top where we have less error and a spreading of results across the bottom where we have more error, right? More variability in the spread of effect sizes and a true population of effects. But what we see here, and if you look closely, sometimes authors, I think, misinterpret these funnel plots. And we see here is this is not a truly symmetrical plot. In the absence of bias, you see symmetry on the plot. But what we see here is fewer dots, each dot represents an effect size, fewer dots on the left-hand side where we have the smaller effects because they're being omitted, possibly likely by authors who don't report them. This case, I think, is actually a little bit even clearer to see. If I look at this, you might be tempted to say, like, okay, well, that effect size in the middle, that looks like a good representation of the distribution of effects in the population, but it's really not. I think that this looks a little bit more accurate. I don't know if you all can see the dots, but if we take, if we take them out, right, and I put them back in, I think this looks like a better representation of the true population, natural, normal distribution of effects. Right, so maybe we should like take the effect sizes that we see, like 0.89, and sort of kind of nudge it back a little bit, right, and say, I just made up the number 0.72. Okay. But anyway, I think that what we have at the meta-analytic level, at the individual study level, but then also at the secondary or meta-analytic level, what we have is inflated effects, inflated results. Why does this happen? One, we're obsessed with statistical significance. P-values are unreliable, they're uninformative, they don't tell us what we want to know, which is about the actual estimate of the relationship that we care about. They're arbitrary, there's nothing magical about 0.05, it's just convention. They're inefficient, and I think they're actually unethical in many cases. P-value, as the American Statistical Association put it, a p-value does not provide a good measure of evidence regarding a model or hypothesis. It's pretty clear, I think. I'm not a statistician, but the American Statistical Association, who I think knows some things about statistics, that's what they say. Why does this happen? Well, we have, as we saw in those results, we have personal, we have professional, we have social, we have institutional biases and preferences that influence our results. They influence the ways that we behave. I think we like to think of a lot of us like to think of our research as, especially quantitative people, like to think of ourselves coming in as relatively neutral or objective. We are not neutral regarding the models or the techniques or the tools that we test. We have preferences, we have biases, we have backgrounds, we have relationships with people, with funders, with tools, with techniques. We go into studies often, if we're honest with ourselves, we go into the studies that we carry out with expectations and in many times hopes of the way that they turn out. And those bias the ways that we behave when we have our results. As Xiao and Peng put it, less than 10% of the empirical research articles explain how the researcher's biases are addressed. We should address this more explicitly. Some people are starting to do that in the form of those statements that we put now at the beginning of articles, sort of author disclosures. Yeah, which is good. Why does this happen? There's also financial bias. The ed tech industry is probably the second largest private funder of applied linguistics research. The first is, of course, assessment, right? That's where the real money is, right? But ed tech is probably number two. Each of these bars represents the severity, the perceived severity of the different QRPs that we looked at. And the most severe, the QRP that was rated as most severe, was not reporting a conflict of interest. Do you think that we as a field routinely and uniformly report conflicts of interest? We don't. This has been looked at as well in a really wonderful piece of meta-science research. Dan Isbell and one of his PhD students at University of Hawaii looked at a sample of testing research and research that where there should be reported disclosures of conflicts of interest, and only 3 of the 68 studies that should have reported or should have disclosed a conflict of interest actually reported or disclosed that potential conflict of interest. Why does this matter? This matter because this leads to mistaken understanding, right? Upward bias of observed effects, as I said, at the primary and the meta-analytic levels. Consequently, this research begets research. Research informs future research, right? So when we misinform in any given study, that leads to misplaced efforts in future research, which I think is an ethical issue as well, right? And it leads to misdirection. We're not able to adequately and appropriately and accurately provide information for all the stakeholders in applied linguistics: teachers, learners, parents, tech firms, policymakers, administrators, whoever it might be. Each of these bars represents a different meta-analysis of just MAL research, just mobile-assisted language learning research. And we see that overall, when we look at across, this is like sort of the meta-meta, right? Because each of these are meta-analytic results. These are the d-values, meaning the standardized mean differences for each of these meta-analyses. The median d-value is about 0.8, meaning that on average, the MAL users benefit about 0.8 of a standard deviation, which is a pretty large effect size, a pretty sizable effect size, right, over the non-MAL users. But I think that given what we know about the biases and the preferences to report and not report certain results, I almost wonder if maybe we should think of this like just by default, we should be setting on top of whatever observed results we have at the primary meta-analytic level, a sort of adjustment for the bias that goes into that effect or that relationship that we observe. I'm just making this, I'm just speculating here, but I think that we need to start pulling back our view on what we know about language, the effectiveness of technology. Okay, so all that said, a few conclusions and ways forward, as well as in line with the conference theme, some new research agenda items. Okay, really quick, some conclusions first. I think it's obvious, but I think it still needs to be said, that study quality matters. Quality really matters. This isn't just a game that we're playing. And I think for most of us, as I said before, I think this is more than just a job. I think that we actually care. For a lot of us, this is a passion project. It's a career, yeah, but it's also a passion, things that we really, really care about in our hearts. Okay? So we need to care about quality. Recognizing that we care about quality is multidimensional. Quality is not something that we can establish a single number, I feel like, to value quality. A study is not categorically low or of high quality. It has many different facets and dimensions. And among those, I think we have to consider, at the very least, we have to consider transparency, methodological rigor, societal value, and ethics. Okay? If anybody wants to add to that list, I would love to hear it. And then also, I want to say that main points is that methodological decisions are also ethical decisions. And with that, I think it leads to the natural conclusion that it is our intellectual and ethical duty to produce high-quality call research. So with that, I want to mention a few ways forward for 3 different levels, okay, for individuals as well as for societies and different spheres that we belong to. First, consider if or how you're contributing to the different dimensions of quality always. Not every study has to be perfect in all the dimensions of quality. There's no such thing as a perfect study, but to consider how your study stacks up on those different dimensions. Insist on quality always, as an author, as a reviewer, as an editor, as a researcher trainer, as a mentor. Practice open science, share your instruments, share your data, pre-register your study, other things like that. Start a research methods club. Heck, why not? My students and I, we have a methods club. We've been doing this for about 15 years. It's called Coffee and Kronbach. We meet about once a month. Sometimes we read an article, sometimes we don't, but we get together to talk methods. It's super nerdy. You think this is nerdy? Oh my gosh, get together with us. It's super nerdy, but we have a good time. And if you're into methods, start a club, learn something new, right? Bring in. I will come to your club. If you start a methods club, if you're here and you start a club, I would love to come to your club. I will be there on Zoom, in person, whatever it takes. I'm there. Think about developing both substantive and methodological expertise. I mentioned earlier we don't have a strong tradition of methodological expertise, but we could. And this has to do with even the way that we identify as scholars in the field. A lot of us think of, when we talk about, on our websites, we talk about, these are the areas where I'm an expert, and I do research on X, Y, and Z. But think about yourself also. Think about also framing yourself as a methodological expert. By the way, you have to be somewhat of a methodological expert to do that, but develop that methodological expertise and identify as a methodologist. and then own that label. Do meta research, do meta science. Join us, it's your destiny. Seriously, let's move away from p-values and simply, we can't advance a discipline simply by refuting the null hypothesis. It's not getting us where we need to go. In addition, I would invite you all to question and examine our methodological conventions. That's what, to me, study quality and the QRPs is all about. Asking yourself, is this tool appropriate? Is it really the best tool? Does it have a strong validity argument behind it? Can I develop a strong validity argument for this tool? And then think and act synthetically. A couple comments just on ways forward for meta research. Study the different subcomponents and the different dimensions of quality, right? We have a forthcoming special issue in Journal of Second Language Studies, specifically on QRPs. What about the evaluation? I think the dimension of quality I mentioned throughout this talk, the one that I think we know the least about is our societal impact, which is really sad. I wonder, does society even know we exist? Do you tell anybody you're an applied linguist? I don't, because nobody knows what it is. Next, if you're flying home, if you fly home, if the person next to you, you're chit-chatting with the person next to you, oh, what are you doing? If you say you went to an applied linguistics conference, then you'd be like, oh, cool, okay. Great, that sounds awesome. Right, I went to a conference once, I was flying on a plane and somebody was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't want to have this conversation, but I'm like, I'm going to a conference. And I'm like trying to like put on my headphones. And like, what kind of conference? And I was like, oh, it's about language learning. And they're like, wow, a whole conference on language learning? I'm like, yeah, wow, yeah, 3 whole days. Wow, so much research, I can't believe it. Aren't you guys bored after the first 2 hours? But you know what? That's on us. That's on us. We don't have a public persona. We don't have a vision. We are not outward facing. Nobody knows applied linguistics. Nobody knows second language acquisition exists. I'm like, we're here, hi, we're trying, but if we're invisible to the public, that's our fault. We need to work on that, and we need to study that to understand whether and to what extent we've had any impact on society, right? I want to know what evidence is there that we've had meaningful and demonstrable contributions in practical realms, in other scientific domains. Shoot, the public doesn't know we exist. Do our colleagues across campus even know we exist? I don't think they do. I don't think that a psychology department knows that there is an applied linguistics department, or they don't even know we're here. That's our fault, though. I would love to see, in the context of CALL, I would love to see a replication of Isabel and Kim, which looked at disclosures of conflicts of interest in the realm of CALL research, which is now more and more funded. And then the final thing is, I'll say, I think we need that sort of societal reform. I think we need what we'd call like top-down reform. We need field-specific guidelines and guidance. I would say, in my preference, would be oriented around this notion of study quality, but we don't have that. We have the APA, kind of. We have the consortium guidelines, kind of. We have the APA Mars and JARS sort of publication standards, kind of. But what we need is field guidelines to direct people who do language research, right? And this would be a wonderful resource, I feel like, for researchers, for editors, reviewers, mentors, researchers in training. The meeting this morning will help get us there, I think, in some ways. Other journal editors are talking about these things. This will also be helpful for scholars in other fields who do research on language. People are out there doing research on language. I've read all these articles where people are like, they think they invented corpus linguistics. They're like, people are like, yeah, I put together a database of texts, right? And then we analyze the texts using Python. I'm like, there's a whole field of corpus linguistics, right? Will the guidelines be perfect? No, but I think they'll be helpful in getting us closer to quality. You know, when I was looking at this corpus that I have, this is my very last slide. When I was looking at this corpus of studies, I was like, I noticed, in EuroCALL, there are articles over the years, I was looking over the years in this corpus, little articles that sort of summarize little synopsis of EuroCALL, almost every year. Has anybody seen these articles? And the one in 1999, I was just, yes, I'm a nerd, okay, I accept it. I'm reading the 1999 issues of EuroCALL to find out the synopsis of the EuroCALL journal conference. And this one piece, the synopsis of the 1999 conference said, the main aim of the seminar, talking about the seminar that was announced at EuroCALL in 1999, will be to discuss the issue raised by David Little in the above document and to produce an action plan that will aim to raise the status of CALL as an area of research, right? And I feel like this aligns really well with something Sue Gass said right around that same time, at that time, she said, respect and progress for the field can only come through sound scientific progress. How do we get there? We get there through quality. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Does this work? Ah, good. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex.
The most important thing. We don't have much time, just a few quick questions. I wanted to ask one question
Please.
to get the ball rolling.
Please.
A lot of us do work with individual intact groups, partly because it's our students and what we're interested in, but also because that's all we can see that we can do. We don't have access to lots and lots of groups. If syntheses and meta-analyses, they take lots of individual studies with individual intact groups, would it be worth developing primary studies with, for example, networking here and having 5 different teacher researchers from 5 different countries doing something and publishing one primary research study together? Or would that introduce too much diversity?
I would love to see that. I mean, multi-site research I think is super powerful. This is a great place to, the people that are in the same talks as you today and this whole time are great people to find as potential collaborators for a multi-site research project. And you can analyze that variability. I think that's fine. You can account for it. I would much rather see that than somebody, if you only have access to 32 participants, don't form 4 subgroup conditions, right? Find somebody else who has access to 32 participants, and then you can do a more robust design. I love that idea.
Cool, thank you. So this is an opportunity. I could ask 20 questions. There's so rich, so much in there. Throw the floor open. Let's volunteer.
Hi, thanks.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you a question about plurimultilingualism because you brought it up. You talked about all the studies that are all talking about learning English and not talking about other languages. And what comes to mind, first of all, for me is that you're obviously looking at all the studies that were published in English. And I think we have a multifaceted problem where fewer and fewer studies are being published in other languages because they're getting less and less recognition. And so we're eliminating huge areas of research in an area that's linguistics. Sorry, for me, it's really problematic.
I totally agree. I totally agree. That's a huge loss. A huge loss for the knowledge that we could be dedicating or obtaining. Yeah, I'm not sure. Do you have any suggestions of what to do about it? Yeah, okay, I'm with you. I know. I feel that. I feel that.
Okay, we have another question.
Anna Frankenberg. Thank you so much for your talk. I think everyone's going to go back to their hotel rooms and start revising their presentations and checking for quality.
I'm not here to judge.
And say, oh, why didn't I do this? So very unnerving to have it as an opening keynote. But anyway, very interesting.
Sorry.
And I have a very simple question. In one of your slides, you mentioned convenience sampling on one end and random sampling as something different. Can't you have both? You can randomize your convenient students. Do you see this as a possibility? Because this is something that I see very often in research in applied linguistics.
That's a great comment and a question. And yeah, we definitely can do that. You can randomize participants within a classroom to different conditions. You couldn't really do that if they're all getting the same type of intervention or treatment at the same time. But if you were taking classroom students and putting them in a lab or in separate rooms, for example, you certainly could randomize them. And that would be better than not, for sure. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
I agree. Fantastic presentation that I think all of us are going to be thinking about for a very long time. My question was just about about QRPs, and at one point you were talking about the tendency for people to either underreport or not report non-significant results, and this immediately made me think not of the researcher, but actually sort of the journals that they're submitting to. And don't you think that the journals have sort of some part in this, in not accepting publications that don't have significant results? I mean, I think this is not only a problem with what the researchers are reporting, it's a problem of them actually being able to get those kind of results published, don't you?
Yeah, it's the two are in conversation, right? But any article that's submitted to a journal, it's the author, sometimes it's two things. It's the author self-suppressing, and we saw that 50% of the field admitted to not even trying to publish those types of results, non-statistically significant results. That's a problem at the author level. But there are also reviewers who are telling authors, don't report this result because it's not statistically significant. And there are editors that are listening to those reviewers. So yeah, this is a problem that comes from both sides. And if anybody here has non-significant results and you get told by a journal editor or reviewer, don't publish the non-significant results, I am on your side, I'm with you, I will help you craft and draft your response letter to make the case. I've done this for many, many people because this comes up a lot. This comes up a lot. But it is on the responsibility of journal editors and reviewers to value those results. Listen, if all the hypotheses and the models that we're testing point and they say there is an effect, there isn't a relationship, and you do a good study and you find there is no effect or a very, very small effect or a very small relationship, that result to me is not only as important, it is more important than the study that simply confirms what the hypothesis said we were going to find. We need that. So yeah, thank you so much, and please fight. This is like, I feel like we're fighting the good fight, but I think it's what we have to do.
Yeah, it's not easy being a journal editor. It's a very difficult job being a journal editor. You have lots of ideas for what you would love studies submitted to your journal to do, and people don't always do them. For example, one thing I believe very strongly in is when you submit an article, submit your complete data set in a spreadsheet format, so somebody else can manipulate it, can come to the same conclusions, can delete the bits they're not interested in, look in one group or one of the things. Please do that, but I've been saying this for years and people don't do it. The number of studies submitted to ReCALL which include a data set is minimal. Please, please do it. If we didn't publish any of those papers, we'd publish nothing. So please, please, a call to all of you, do submit your data sets. Do we have time for one last question? One last question. No? Who?
Early career research, we're facing basically, I don't know the expression, basically in Chinese, you promote it or you leave. So we're under lots of pressure to publish, not at my university though. But the things that I've seen lots of my colleagues, not my colleague at my university, like people I know, they recycle ideas. They publish 6 papers a year, but lots of ideas, not papers, just ideas. Both of you, do you see this as promoting the quality of research by replicating your own idea, or you think it actually compromises the quality?
That's tough. There's a lot of different issues there. I'm a big fan of replication research as a way to arrive at more solid understanding of the things that we think we know. I think that the idea of salami slicing, though, I don't support that. Sort of taking a similar data set and just sort of rehashing it a different way, cutting up a data set too thin to publish lots of articles. This is a really interesting question. I think it sort of gets at, this is a meta-science question. A question of what's the right amount of data to publish and how do you sort of balance career strategy with contributing in meaningful ways to the discipline. Yeah, I don't have a clear answer to it, but I think those are the issues at play. I like that. But to keep your job, yeah, publish a lot.